Hey guys, it's Carly from All the Pretty Books, and I was finishing up my Robert Galbraith audiobook the other day. It was book 7 of the Cormoran Strike series, which I also really enjoy. And really good audiobook reader. If you haven't listened to the books, I highly recommend them. I really enjoy the reader. Anyway, I was finishing up that book, and I was talking about the book at work with some friends there, and not a lot of people knew the J.K. Rowling connection to the Robert Galbraith Cormoran Strike series, so I thought we'd talk about it today. In April 2013, it was April 4th in the UK and April 30th in the US, a book was published called The Cuckoo's Calling by a then unknown author called Robert Galbraith. In the UK, it was published by Sphere, and this is the first edition cover art. I really love the cover art. And in the US, it was published by Mulholland Books. Both of those are actually under Little Brown and Company. Nobody really knew much about the author, Robert Galbraith. It was on the back of the book that Robert Galbraith was a pen name. It was on the advanced reader copies that were handed out in the US and the UK. So people knew that Robert Galbraith was a pen name, but we really didn't know much more beyond that, and a lot of people really didn't care. It was a brand new series by an unknown author, and it was doing okay. When it was published, well, before it was published, it was rejected, as a lot of books are, especially by unknowns. But when it was finally picked up and published by Sphere in UK and Mulholland Books, or Little Brown and Company, really, for both US and UK, the feedback, the commentary, the criticism was overall pretty good. The first print run for the Sphere book, which is this one right here, the one in the UK, was 1,500 copies, which is pretty standard for a book by an unknown author and an unknown series. But that people kind of want to see how it's going to do. It was a pretty standard print run. In the first 3 months after the book was published, the initial reception of the book was overall pretty good. People really enjoyed reading it. They had overall pretty good reviews to say about the book. And the book itself had sold all 1,500 tangible copies and had sold on other formats as well. I think something about like almost 8,000 copies between all different formats had been sold by July 13th, 2013. And why is July 13th, 2013 important? It's because J.K. Rowling was outed as the actual author of The Cuckoo's Calling. She was outed as the person behind the pseudonym of Robert Galbraith by the Sunday Times. Within hours after the article appeared, demand for the book dramatically increased, as you can imagine, and publishers in both the US and the UK quickly put the book back into reprint, because in those first 3 months, all the tangible copies of the book had sold. So book back into reprint, and sales soared. The book went from being almost ranked 5,000th on the bestseller list to number 1 within hours. At first, after being outed, J.K. Rowling was pretty furious. And that makes sense. This was a secret she had not even told some of her closest friends. She had tried to guard it very, very well, because she had really enjoyed getting to write this book without being found out. At one point, she thought the BBC had outed her because they had approached her publisher about creating a made-for-television TV series based on the Cuckoo's Calling book. But in fact, that was not what happened. What had actually happened was a lawyer at Russell's Solicitors, who had worked with J.K. Rowling, had confided to his wife's best friend that J.K. Rowling was Robert Galbraith. And then the best friend, over Twitter, outed J.K. Rowling to the Sunday Times. The Sunday Times then went and analyzed the writing of the book, the structure of the book, the grammar, the mechanics of the book, and pretty much everything in between, to see if what had been told to them by this woman was in fact true. They involved some university professors, some fancy software, and they analyzed The Cuckoo's Calling against other well-known authors, and including the works by J.K. Rowling, which included now The Casual Vacancy and the books from the Harry Potter series. And it was concluded after all of that J.K. Rowling was more than likely the author. After the dust settled, the firm who employed the lawyer who had outed J.K. Rowling made a sizable charitable donation to the Soldiers Charity, I believe is what it's called. And the attorney himself was also fined. Rowling had said of that experience of being outed that she was really, really pretty furious that she had really enjoyed creating, again, without the hype of being J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter's author, that she had enjoyed, honest criticism, honest feedback, and just kind of enjoying being unknown again. And she had enjoyed that part of it and wished it could have gone on until at least maybe book 3. Also, after all of this, people began to question why a male alter ego, why she chose a male pseudonym. And she said simply because she wanted to keep her alter ego's persona as far away from her as possible. So she went with a male personality, male pseudonym, to keep that division pretty separate. She said she chose a military background for Robert Galbraith as a way to explain away why Robert couldn't appear at any public appearances. He didn't exist. As for the name Robert Galbraith, she chose Robert because of her admiration for Robert F. Kennedy, and she picked Galbraith because as a little girl, she'd always loved the name Ella Galbraith. At one point, she said she was looking at using the initials L.A. Galbraith, but decided very quickly against initials for very obvious reasons. As for making Robert Galbraith's military background very convincing, and the same for actually Cormoran Strike, who is the hero of the Cuckoo's Calling and now the Cormoran Strike series, she relied upon some pretty trusted friends who were also soldiers who had quite a lot of experience with the military, and they were very happy to help her with her research. There are actually signed examples of the first edition, first print Cuckoo's Calling. There were 250 of these books that were signed by J.K. Rowling using a signature she'd crafted for Robert Galbraith. And they were sold, or actually sent over to Goldsborough in London, who is a bookseller that specializes in selling signed hardback first edition books. So the bookstore selling them nobody would have thought much of it because that's what they do. So 250 of them do exist of the 1,500. I think that's really neat. Also, and importantly, as with all things that are J.K. Rowling that are signed, there are forgeries. I've seen forgeries with forged J.K. Rowling holograms and just flat, Robert Galbraith signature forgeries. So you just have to always be careful. It's frustrating, but it's just kind of the nature of collecting signed things. Where there's authentic signed things, there's going to be fake signed things. So I was editing the video and I realized I really didn't care for how I discussed value, so I'm back to redo it a few days later. Anyway, as far as collectible value, the books I should say, that's going to carry the most weight unsigned are going to be the first print, first edition Cuckoo's Calling, published by Sphere, April 4th, 2013. And then the first print, first edition Cuckoo's Calling, published by Mulholland Books, April 30th, 2013. That was, of course, back before we knew that J.K. Rowling was Robert Galbraith, before she'd been outed in July, and there was no mention of her on the dust jackets. People had no idea. And the advanced reader copies for both UK and the US also carry some collectability weight compared to the other books. By the second print of Cuckoo's Calling, both US and UK, she'd been outed. Print runs were much larger. And the same for the subsequent Robert Galbraith or Cormoran Strike series books. The print runs are much larger, so finding first prints really isn't all that hard. The signed Robert Galbraith book that's going to be worth the most is going to be one of the 250 that was sold at Goldsborough Books before we knew that J.K. Rowling was Robert Galbraith. So it's going to be the signed first print, first edition that was sold before we knew anything. That I saw several listed for around $4,000. I don't know if they're selling around there, but probably, because I saw a bunch kind of around that price point. So I'm guessing that's probably where they're trading at. For other signed books, I would probably say less than 1,000. It's a bit harder, but there are collectors of the Robert Galbraith books, signed and unsigned as well. The demand just isn't going to be as high as with Harry Potter, is what I'm noticing. Anyway, back to the regularly scheduled video. As far as how the books are doing now in 2025, we are now up to 7 books. As of February 2024, so about a year ago, 20 million copies of the books in total have been sold. We have the books being translated into many different languages, some with, I think, pretty unique cover art, some with US cover art as well, and UK cover art, kind of like what you see with the Harry Potter translations. But they've been translated in quite a few languages, not as many as Harry Potter, and I don't collect those, so I'm not as versed in those, but I've seen them. The BBC has gone ahead and made a TV series based on the books, and it's actually really fun to watch. I've seen pretty much the whole series up until this point, and it's really enjoyable. They have a great cast of characters playing some of my favorite characters to read, and it's really fun. And like with the Harry Potter movies, the TV series is sometimes fairly different from the books, but they're still pretty fun. I enjoy them. If you haven't read the Cormoran Strike series, I really do recommend it. Book 1 is kind of the hardest one, I think, to get through, and I actually really still enjoy it, but Rowling is trying to write very differently than she does in the other books. And she's also still kind of getting to know her character, the series, and even Robert Galbraith as an author, or alter ego. So you can just kind of tell that, but the audiobook, the reader for the audiobook is so engaging, so much fun, and I really do enjoy listening to him. So I actually recommend listening to the Robert Galbraith books for the first time before actually, tangibly reading them if you can. It's such a treat. He's very engaging as a reader. The other books I actually really do enjoy as well. I usually listen to them on audio because, again, I love the reader. But bear in mind, they're not for the faint of heart. They're pretty adult in some places, and it's definitely not Harry Potter anymore there, I have to tell you. And since I really didn't go into much or any detail about telling first print, first edition Cuckoo's Calling from reprints, I will go ahead and put links down below for that. Alrighty, I think that pretty much wraps it up. It is, again, very late. Or early, depending upon how you look at things, and I need to get to bed. For all of your J.K. Rowling signed book questions, I'm going to put Adam's information down below. He is the Harry Potter specialist, and he is phenomenal. He's wonderfully knowledgeable, and he's super friendly, and he's just really enjoyable to work with. So I'm going to put his stuff down below. For all of your questions about collecting Harry Potter books, don't hesitate to reach out, and I'll happily chat books with pretty much anybody. If you want more Harry Potter content, all about collecting Harry Potter stuff, I co-host a podcast called Dialogue Alley with Melanie and Eric. We are the official podcast of the Potter Collector, and we have just so much fun. We discuss our translation collections. We discuss other Harry Potter news. Pretty much, if it's Potter related, we'll discuss it. And we're in season 5, so we've been doing it for a few years now, and we just have so much fun. I'll put that information down below. And with that, I think it's time for me to go to bed. So I'm going to say thanks for watching, stay magical, and as always, very happy collecting, and good night.